Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and in today's video I want to talk about the single-handedly largest grounding of aircraft in aviation history that recently happened to the Airbus A320 family. Now, this sounds very significant, but you all have probably noticed that in practical terms most aircraft kept flying, or at least were flying very quickly again. So today let's talk about why, and let's go into what exactly happened there. So let's start with a basic case. What happened? So on October 30th, an Airbus A320 aircraft flew from Cancun in Mexico to Newark in the United States. And they were basically en route at flight level 370 when the aircraft suddenly experienced what we call an in-flight upset. Now, an in-flight upset basically means that the aircraft exceeds certain limitations, for example, a certain degrees of pitch up or pitch down, or a certain bank angle. So basically it left the normal operating envelope. Now, this was a fairly significant event. Obviously, Mayday was declared due to flight control issues. The aircraft did an emergency landing, landed safely, but there were a number of injured passengers on board the aircraft. See, that's why you should always keep your seatbelt fastened. Then that little ambulance that just went through our aircraft would probably not have been needed. So even if it's not turbulent, always have that seatbelt fastened. You never know what it may be good for. Now, after this, an investigation was launched, and it turned out that this upset was actually caused by a malfunction in one of the Airbus's computers, namely the so-called ELAC, the elevator and aileron computer of the Airbus A320 family. Now, let's go into how exactly those flight controls work on the A320 family so that we can get an idea of what exactly happened. And for that we are going to have a look at a little schematic of the A320's flight control system over here. So this is what it looks like. Now, it looks complex at first, but let's bring a little bit of clarity into this. So you got your side stick over here. And the side stick input basically goes into two computers. The first of them is the elevator and aileron computer, the ELAC. There are two of those fitted to the aircraft. It also goes into the SEC, which is the spoiler and elevator computer. Now, under normal law, which is what the aircraft normally flies in, the input from the side stick simply goes into the ELAC, and then, as we can see, the ELAC is going to control the ailerons and also going to control the elevators. Now, what happened on this particular flight was a so-called single event upset. Now, a single event upset is an effect that especially occurs at high altitude, and basically cosmic radiation is going to strike a memory unit or a logic unit of a computer. Now, you normally don't see this happen too much on the ground because the atmosphere, Earth's atmosphere, is able to absorb any of the radiation that is causing this. So for devices used on the ground like your mobile phones, protections against single event upsets are not really necessary. But for aircraft that operate like above 80% of the Earth's atmosphere, single event upsets are a fairly common issue, and therefore aircraft avionics are built so that they protect against these issues. Now, in a single event upset, any of those solar radiation particles like neutrons, protons, or heavy ions basically strike a memory unit or a logic processor, and they flip a single bit. So remember, at very basic logic, computers are made out of ones and zeros. An event is either true or untrue. And this radiation basically hits that memory unit or logic element and simply flips a 0 into a 1 or the other way around. It does not cause any actual damage to the unit, so there is no burning, no short circuit, or no permanent hardware failure. But obviously it can be rather significant if an event that was previously meant to be true is suddenly untrue in that logic unit. Now, aircraft avionics are built to protect against this, and I'm not going to go into details of how to do these protections, but just know that aircraft are built to protect against this. And it turned out that in the latest software revision to that ELAC computer, in combination with a certain hardware equipment for that ELAC, this protection was actually not functioning properly, and therefore a fault could be caused in what we just identified as a vital component of the aircraft's flight control computers, and that could cause the elevator to move. Now, during the course of this A320 incident, it turned out that there is actually this software bug, and obviously something like that needs to be corrected immediately. If you've got faulty flight control software, well, we've all seen what might happen with a different type of airplane a couple of years ago, and it is very good to see that the aviation industry has learned from that case, and Airbus did the only thing that they actually could, and that was to release what's called an alert operator transmission. Now, an alert operator transmission basically is the message of one of the highest priorities to any airline or to any operator that flies Airbus aircraft. And they basically released this alert operator transmission stating that the entire A320 family, so that's A318, 19, 20 and all the Neos and all serial numbers are potentially affected. And that basically means some 11,000 aircraft were affected from this. Now, let's go ahead and have a look at the exact alert operator transmission that Airbus has sent out. A quick Google search is going to find it for you. So this is what it looks like. Now, over here we can see aircraft affected, basically all of them, and all serial numbers. So that is a really, really severe document that's been issued over there. Now, in this document, Airbus basically says that an A320 aircraft recently experienced an uncommanded and limited pitch down event. The autopilot remained engaged, and with a brief and limited loss of altitude, the rest of the flight was uneventful. Doesn't sound too severe, but as mentioned, this is a document that the public can see, so obviously they would phrase it like that. Now, this one here is the interesting point. So, investigation, root cause and consequences. The subsequent investigation identified a vulnerability with the LAC-B hardware fitted with software L104 in case of exposure to solar flares. This identified vulnerability could, and this is the important point, could lead in the worst case scenario to an uncommanded elevator movement that may result in exceeding the aircraft's structural capability. This is limited to LAC-B standard L104. All previous LAC-B software standards as well as LAC-E software standards are not affected. So basically, they say that this particular LAC-B standard L104 could, in the worst case, lead to an uncommanded elevator movement that may exceed the aircraft's structural capability, aka lead to an in-flight breakup of the aircraft, to put it in layman's terms. Now, as you can see, this alert operator transmission requires, as an immediate safety measure, reversion to LAC standards L103+ for a significant number of aircraft equipped with LAC-B and L104 software. Now, later on, it turned out that about 6,500 aircraft were affected from this. So out of the 11,000 A320 family aircraft flying, 6,500 were actually affected from this. Now, the AOT goes on to state the maintenance procedure that has to be conducted. However, this one here is significant as well. Accomplishment timescale. Perform AOT instructions before next flight. AKA, if you don't do this, your airplane is grounded. Now, they add on to this, in the event that the tasks defined in the AOT have not been completed before the next flight, or the aircraft is not located at an appropriate maintenance base by November 29, the aircraft may be grounded by EASA Emergency Airworthiness Directive, expected to be issued on November 28th. AKA, airlines, you do this now or your aircraft are not flying any longer. Now what's interesting down here as well is to see the manpower requirement for this. They say basically 3 man-hours are required. AKA, one engineer would take 3 hours to fix this. 3 engineers together might only take a single hour to fix this. So, as you can see, this is a really large problem that they found, and a really significant one, which could in the worst case lead to the aircraft simply breaking up in flight. But it's easily fixable. It only requires you to upload a different software, and that takes 3 man-hours to accomplish. Now, obviously, this is a rather significant thing. The rest of the AOT, by the way, only goes on to tell or to give the exact instructions of how to fix the problem. So the rest of this is not really that interesting to look into. Now, what is really interesting to look into is the emergency airworthiness directive that EASA has issued. So, about 2 hours after the alert operator transmission came out, EASA issued the emergency airworthiness directive. And as you can see over here, type models, A319 2021. Now look at the applicability. That is pretty much the entire Airbus A320 family, all serial numbers. In other words, you got an emergency airworthiness directive, which is about the highest standard you can get, and it tells all aircraft affected. So, let's have a look into what exactly EASA required as a regulator as a response to the alert operator transmission issued by Airbus. So they split the A320 family aircraft into 2 different groups. Group number 1 is those having an affected ALAC installed and being of the configurations, aka the hardware component and the software component, of the ALAC that has been defined by Airbus. And Group 2 aeroplanes are those which basically don't have them. Those which are not Group 1 aeroplanes, that is legislator language to say that they do not have the affected ALAC installed with the corresponding software version. Now the reason down here is explained again in a little bit more direct language than what Airbus has issued, and then they go down for the required actions and compliance times. So basically, all actions have to be done for affected aircraft before the next flight. Replace the unit. A ferry flight, however, up to 3 flight cycles, which means 3 takeoffs and landings, which must not be ETOPS and which must not carry passengers, is permitted only to position the airplane to a location where the replacement or modification can be accomplished. Now, this basically is done so that an airplane which may be somewhere where it really cannot be repaired, let's say you are at a remote island location where it's almost impossible to get spare parts to, or to get an engineer to, then that aircraft can, without passengers and without ETOPS, be repositioned to an airport where this work can be done, but without passengers. Now, basically, parts installation, replace the faulty part, fix it. And that's everything that this emergency airworthiness directive states. So that is about the highest level of, let's say, directive that you can receive, aka fix this now or your planes aren't flying any longer. It's very good to see that this is being implemented. We all remember the cases where it wasn't and where a second aircraft actually crashed. And it's very good to see that the industry has learned from that. Now, this is the largest grounding of aircraft that we have seen in the aviation industry. About 11,000 aircraft are affected by this. However, as we could also see, only about 3 man-hours are required to actually fix the problem. And that is the reason why you did only see a very small impact in the actual operations. Now, let's quickly talk about how aircraft had to be fixed. So, as I mentioned earlier, about 6.5 of the 11,000 A320 family aircraft flying were affected from this. Now, from those 6,500, the majority of them could simply be fixed by uploading that earlier software standard for the ALAC B103 Plus instead of the version 104 software. So simply reverting that software, which takes 3 man-hours by an engineer, and the airplane can fly again. And that's about everything that had to be done over here. And this was applicable to most A320 family aircraft. However, if you do a little bit of research in the media, you will notice that not all airlines were actually able to get their aircraft into the air quickly again. And the reason for that is that from those affected 6,500 aircraft, a small number of them had hardware installed that could not be downgraded to that earlier standard. That hardware had been built only for the new software standard. And those airlines that have those aircraft actually have a bit of a problem now. Because now, all of those airlines will be running for spare parts of the earlier ELAC computers. And chances are that those are not going to be available in the required number, because hey, it's an older version of the computer. Like, how many shops still have an iPhone 10 in store? Probably not too many. So if you're looking for an iPhone 10 and suddenly everyone is looking for an iPhone 10, chances are, number one, they're going to get expensive. Number two, there will simply not be enough available. So spare parts will obviously be manufactured now, and all the problems are going to be solved. But for those small number of aircraft, the emergency airworthiness directive actually means that they will not be flying for a little while until those spare parts are available. Well, and that's everything that's been going on here with the latest grounding of the A320 family aircraft. As you can see, a very severe issue that is actually very, very easy to fix by simply reverting to an older software standard. Now, some of you may say that, hey, an aviation investigation is supposed to give us a little bit more information than what we've just gotten, isn't it? And the answer is absolutely yes. And Airbus actually stated in an article that the investigations have not been completed just yet. However, the issue found in it was so significant that immediate action had to be taken. And obviously the entire rest is going to be fixed, or is going to be investigated after the immediate danger has been banned. Well, and that's how aviation industry handles events like this when a real problem is found. I do hope you guys found this one interesting. As you can see, large event, potentially dangerous event, but easily solvable event. And that is what most operators have actually done. So thank you very much for watching, everyone. I do hope you all have enjoyed this video. Leave your feedback in the comments underneath the video. And with all of that out of the way, thank you very much for watching. As always, be sure to like, comment and subscribe. And if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.